have a son, you have a daughter. We'll join our houses.
The lift moaned and creaked as it carried Arya to the top of the wall. She had viewed the kingdoms previously from Eastwatch, but never from Castle Black. Her thoughts dwelled on her future husband and their daughter. She was actually surprised Jon had agreed to allow her to search for Gendry in his place. She thought it odd their wolves had been absent for the day. Although her concern suddenly shifted to the lift and its unexpected halt a mere 100 feet from the top of the wall. Arya peered down the wall. The castle below was blurred and unfocused. The top of the wall was within eyesight, and after a few moments, Arya assumed something had gone wrong. She had sailed across the narrow sea and galloped hundreds of miles across the Gift. She was then raised nearly to the top of the wall, only to be stifled by the last 100 feet. With this thought, she thrust the gate open and carefully pulled herself to the top of the lift. The guide beams for the lift stretched all the way to the top of the wall. Arya considered scaling them but would not commit until the status of the lift could be clarified. Without warning, the lift began to descend at a much higher rate of speed. Not falling, but far too fast for Arya's comfort, for she knew something below had gone wrong. Against her better judgment, Arya grasped the vertical beams that supported the lift. Her feet struggled to grasp the nearly frozen, petrified beams that were as likely as old as the wall itself. She found her footing and started making her way up the wall. Arya thought of all the free climbing training she conducted with her daughter all those years ago on the cliff faces of the Red Keep. The cross members connected the beams at intervals of just a few feet. This made Arya's climb quite manageable, truth be told. It was not her preferred method of arriving atop the wall. If a fight was to be had, she wanted to be at her full strength. However, the lift's malfunction had left her with few options. The creaking and moaning of the lift had returned as it rose up from beneath her feet. Arya leapt atop the cage and rode it up to its final resting stop. She lay low, avoiding any adversaries that assumed her to be inside the cage. She waited for a few moments before rising and taking in the scenery. The wind whipped past her ears and the gusts ensured all the fresh powder blew off the wall. They almost formed their own clouds upon the realm below. She removed Frost from her belt and secured her satchel to her side. She leapt from atop the cage as her feet finally set down upon the top of the wall. A quick take of her surroundings only revealed a beautiful view in addition to a single hunched figure. It was dark, humbled and shivering as Arya carefully approached, keeping a close eye on all her peripherals. There were no others present, save for the northern wind that filled her ears. Arya slowly approached the prisoner as he was dressed in threadbare clothing and shivering in these harsh conditions. Arya again checked her surroundings before bending down to the man's level. He slowly raised his tired eyes to meet hers, and Arya saw the despair behind them. His tongue had been removed long ago. Arya remembered how these eyes pleaded with her on the King's Road so many months ago. A simple flash of Arya's hand had removed the face from the prisoner, revealing the man behind it. The father of her daughter was now crouched before her. Arya remembered something Jaqen had told her many years ago, that the faces were poison to the uninitiated. Once again, Jaqen's tongue did not lie. Gendry's skin was cold to the touch and held a sheen of yellow, almost green. He vomited violently upon the face's removal and wiped his mouth with his hands that had now been restored. Arya wept, knowing how many months he had worn this disguise against his will. It had been slowly poisoning him ever since he was smuggled out of King's Landing. He tried his voice, but his tongue had seemed too large for his mouth, a likely result of not feeling his own tongue for the past numerous months. After a various amount of throat clearing and spitting, Gendry attempted to try his voice.
Why? Why are you here? Why are you alone?
I'm your Kingsguard. I am to be your wife. If we were to produce another heir, I'd assume you'd be inclined to privacy.
Arya jested, but Gendry was not amused. His eyes continually shifted in all directions and would rest on Arya as she continuously attempted to acquire his attention.
Don't believe what your eyes reveal to you.
A chill then went down Arya's spine. It wasn't advice. It was a warning. Arya stood upright with Frost gripped tightly in her left hand. The top of the wall offered a clear line of sight to the north and to the south. However, passageway channels and defense equipment blocked her view to the west and east. It was a maze atop the wall, and Arya now noticed how exposed they both were. Arya detected movement and shuffled near the edge of the wall to garner a better view. Off in a distance, she could see a single man draped in dark blue with no weapon that she could see. The tall elderly man just returned her glare despite the snow blowing in the wind. Arya then raised her sword towards the distant stranger. He was within shouting distance, and Arya would demand to know his intentions. She was a Kingsguard, the Lord Commander, in fact. The first in the realm's history as a woman. She found herself at the edge of the world, all in defense of her king. If there was to be a duel for the fate of his grace, Arya could think of no better setting for the ladies of the court to sing about. She never strived for recognition or valor, but simply to be free to make choices for herself. Those same choices are what had guided her here, atop the wall in defense of her king, her love. Arya gripped Needle tightly and advanced on the slender man. Gendry screamed in protest, but Arya was born of conflict, of struggle. The steel in her hand was wielded by Stark warriors such as King Torrhen, the regent Lord Cregan, and her grandfather Rickard Stark. Arya welcomed a fight despite the protest from her weakened ruler. Arya's senses became saturated as numerous shadows peeled off from the distant slender man. They had scurried off in numerous directions. Still, Arya's eyes remained fixated on the original. Her left arm continued to be outstretched towards her suspected enemy, her breath fogged, which would obscure her vision. Her approach remained lateral to provide her a clear line of sight of the slender man. A quick flash of steel cut through the northern winds before Arya could blink. One of the colorful shadows of the thin man followed through his slash, which separated Arya from the steel of her ancestors. Arya swore she heard the cries of Lord Cregan and King Torrhen. The longer the cries continued, Arya realized the screams had come from her own lungs. Her Frost tumbled over the edge of the wall, which confused Arya considering she still felt the sword firmly inside her grasp. Arya finally looked down to her trusty sword hand. It was then she realized that not only Frost was tumbling down the wall, but her sword hand as well. The colorful shadow of the slender man stood over her as she hastily removed her sword belt and wrapped it above her elbow. Gendry was correct. She was a fool to trust in her own eyes. The shadow's blade was held under her chin and raised her back to her feet. She was guided back towards her hobbled king as she felt her face flush. She collapsed beside him and noted Gendry's stoic response almost as he had expected this result. Arya refused surrender and thought quickly as how they were to resist. The faint word of her king brought her back to the present.
Remember how your mother died, desperate and pleading. Or how your brother or your father nearly died of shock before a blade eventually took their life.
What are you then suggesting, my love?
To accept fate, our fates. To pass on peacefully and in appreciation of the lives we have lived. As my own father had.
Arya felt conflicted as the dozen or so shadows encircled them. Her eyes continually shifted, noting their movements. Gendry's words seemed in direct contradiction to those taught by her dancing master so many years ago.
Arya, look at me.
Her king commanded, and Arya's puffy eyes locked onto his. She was desperate, but the face of the only man she ever loved seemed to calm the responsive animal within her. His eyes lowered down to the severed stump that remained of the sword arm of his Kingsguard.
What of Brianna now?
Arya cried, suddenly realizing she would no longer be able to make good on her promise to her daughter.
Luckily, she takes after her mother. A lone wolf that, until this point, has indeed survived.
Arya sobbed at these words, not because she disagreed with the logic her king had displayed, but the finality of his tone. It seems Gendry had accepted his fate long ago. Arya was still coming to grips with her own.
I'm sorry. For my distance. For being a recluse. We should have married years ago.
Arya sobbed. It was at these words the circling shadows retreated into their original host. The thin man carried a short sword, obviously of a foreign smith, Arya thought. The pain had started to set in as the warlock took interest in her last statement to her king.
Many greetings, maiden. Forgive me for failing to introduce myself. I am Pyat Pree of the city of Karth, the greatest city there ever was or will be.
Arya's eyes rose, noting his blue lips and skeletal form. Arya attempted to stand before her. Dizziness forced her back onto her knees.
You come here uninvited, my lord. If you were to withdraw immediately, we could discuss terms at a neutral site with...
The rest of Arya's words had stuck in her throat as Pyat's short sword was now pressed against her neck. His eyes lowered to her satchel as he gently removed it. A grin spread across his face as he had recovered that of which he had once lost. Little value the dragon egg must have meant to him, Arya thought, knowing her brother Jon remained the last dragon rider in the realm. Still, Pyat remained gleeful, which made Arya's stomach drop.
I couldn't help but overhear. Am I correct in assuming there was to be a royal marriage?
Arya swallowed her pride and silently shook her head. She remained slightly dizzy from her loss of blood, but she couldn't help but sense the slightest amount of pity from the warlock's voice.
Would you allow me to perform the honor, your grace? Come. Meet your gods as an honest man and wife.
Arya's pride would never allow her to admit such a vulnerable desire of hers in the face of an enemy. Gendry always knew her better than most, but he broke eye contact with her and addressed Pyat directly.
My lord, would you do us the honor of performing this royal union in the light of the Seven, as it is the official faith of the crown?
Gendry asked in order to alleviate Arya from having to suffer the indignity. She smiled at her groom, knowing she revealed her longing to commit to him before the worst was to happen. Peace were the words Gendry had spoken to her to settle her rambunctious soul.
I would be honored, your grace.
He responded with a pompous sense. Arya shuffled over to Gendry's frail form. Both bride and groom remained on their knees, looking up to the man who would act as their septon. He drew a deep breath before addressing all of those upon the wall, all of those who defended the north, and all of those who inhabited the realm.
As Westeros will soon mourn the death of their king, let them join their houses as one. I will not ask for the donning of the groom's cloak, as his protection is soon to be felt wanting.
Arya cringed at the warlock's taunts. Still, their union was not to be witnessed by any others. Still, it meant something to Arya and Gendry. She was sure of it.
With this kiss, I pledge my love.
And I take you for my lord and husband, and my king.
And I take you for my lady and my wife.
In the light of the Seven, I hereby see you, these two souls, binding them as one for an eternity. Now look upon one another and say the words.
Father,
Smith,
warrior,
mother, maiden, crone,
crone,
stranger. I am
I
hers,
am his,
and she is mine.
From
This day until the end of my days.
As granted upon me by the light of the Seven, I hereby declare these two as man and wife. One flesh, one heart, one soul, now and forever.
Arya then kissed her husband passionately, remembering the first time she had done so in the Tower of Harrenhal. She then stated softly in her husband's ear,
My king.
Then his grace simply responded.
My dearest queen.
The delight was short-lived as Pyat Pree grasped Gendry by his hair and dragged him a few feet away. He remained on his knees as the short sword was then held under his chin.
I promise you both. It is not of a personal nature that I take your lives. It is simply the power of the gods that has been bestowed upon your blood, that of which I do require.
Gendry smiled widely at his wife, his love, his queen. The deeply scarred face and soul of his queen then smiled back. Peaceful, Arya thought. A swift flash of steel and the spray of crimson on the white background was all Arya could see. She held her smile and eye contact as long as she assumed Gendry to still be alive. Once the color had left his eyes, Arya screamed loud enough to shake the wall beneath her. The same flash of steel had kissed her own neck without warning. It was not as Arya would have anticipated it. First, the rush of cold from the steel on her skin, and then a slight burn from the knife's edge. The burning had vanished as quickly as it had appeared before the warmth had spread over her front side. No sooner had the warmth been noticed before the fierce cold had set in, from head to toe and right down to her bones. It was cold unlike anything Arya had ever felt before. Then the lightheadedness. Arya had never wanted to sleep more so in her life. She then collapsed onto her face, taking in the deep green eyes of her ever-patient husband. Today was indeed that day. Arya could feel the fresh taste of blood in her mouth. She felt as if she had not eaten in days. Still, this kill would sustain her, and her brother. A sickly feeling ate at the pit of her stomach, and she felt a sudden rush of sadness or despair. She looked across her kill into the deep red eyes of her brother. He too must have felt the same shudder that seemingly had shaken the entire north.